Welcome to Mind Pioneer, the podcast where host Scott Donnell interviews experts in health, wellness, and technology.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Mind Pioneer. We're very excited today to be having a conversation with Brian. I don't want to mess this up. I'm going to start over. Okay, it's Trzaskos?
Trzaskos.
Trzaskos.
Just take the Z out.
Trzaskos. All right, let's start this over. Karina, count in 3, 2. Hey everybody, Scott here. Welcome back to another episode of Mind Pioneer. We're very excited to welcome our guest today, Brian Trzaskos. He is a somatic intelligence expert, co-creator of the sensation-based motivation coaching program. He has a history in many things: neurophysiology, somatic psychology, energy medicine practices, physical therapy, stress reduction, trauma-informed motivation. It's evidence-based. He has a long history of this, and it's going to be extremely interesting. He's also one of the world's only licensed practitioners to employ the Motivation Maps assessment program, the only assessment designed to measure the full spectrum of motivation. His programs have improved individuals' motivation scores 100 up to 167%. So we're going to get into motivation today. All right. Problems with health, mental wellness, motivation, performance. That's what we're going to talk about. So Brian, welcome to the podcast. How are you, man?
Scott, thanks so much for having me here. I really appreciate it. I am super excited to be talking with you.
This is going to be good. So the topic for today is motivation. All right. And I am going to throw in crazy ideas, and I'm going to ask you, how can you get me to do X? So I'm always the rat in the lab. All right. So we're going to do practical. I just spent 100 days picking and prodding and shooting up my body with peptides and exosomes and foods and workouts, and found out everything about myself, 17 supplements a day and compression, red light, cold therapy, everything. It was super fun. I'm the lab rat. So you're going to use me and my trauma and my motivations today. So let's start with this question. What the heck is somatic intelligence? Explain that to the normal people.
So somatic intelligence, if we think about the mind, so there's so much talk. Oh, here we are, we're on Mind Pioneer podcast, right? So we talk about mind, what we like to say is that the mind doesn't only exist between your ears. So when people think about mindset, they always kind of point to their head. And I think we forget that mind for me means information or intelligence. And the vast array of intelligence that we have both within us and outside of us doesn't only exist in our brain, in other words. So, there's intelligence all around us. There's universal mind, universal consciousness that I think a lot of us are trying to tap into. We, of course, have intellectual intelligence, mind. We have emotional intelligence, and we certainly have physical, or what we call somatic intelligence. So somatic intelligence is it's the wisdom of our body. And understanding that our body is, it's a series of patterns essentially. And the somatic system, the sensory system, which I know we're going to kind of tap into today. So I don't want to give away too much right off the bat, but mind is information. And whenever we want to change anything in our life, when we want to get a different result, when we want to seek motivation for change, we have to understand where we're operating from, why we're operating that way, and what we need to do to change our operational system to get something different. And we have to be able to tap into information to do that. And I think that our body is the place that people are least capable of tapping into for that information. And that's where somatic intelligence comes into play.
So you got to learn what you're talking about to be able to have your somatic experience be changed. Okay, this is powerful. So somatic, you're saying, is basically the wisdom of the body itself. Yeah. What's happening in the body, or what you do to the body, what you put in the body? What kind of things are you talking about here?
Well, it's kind of all of the above. When we think about a mind or information, again, what we like to think about is that all information, is all patterns. Everything is patterns in the universe. And as humans, we are always looking to decode the patterns that are around us to make meaning of them, to either help us move forward, stay where we are, whatever decisions or choices we're looking to make. And that as human beings, every pattern in ourselves, in our own personal experience, has four basic basic components: sensations, thoughts, words, and actions. Those are the 4 parts of every single pattern. So when we talk about sensation-based motivation coaching or motivation methods, they're sensation-based. When we look at neurophysiology, we have to recognize just the way we're wired as humans. Every decision we make is based on sensory information. That's how our nervous system works. It's sensory in, motor out. It's not motor in, motor out. It's not motor in, it's sensory in, motor out. Sensory information comes into the brain. The brain makes sense of that sensory information, and we make a decision based on that. So what we realize is that to understand our somatic intelligence, our somatic process, what's going on inside of us, is really about understanding the sensory patterns that we experience and how those are ultimately the drivers of the decisions that we make.
Okay, so my next question was talking about why on earth you got into the sensation-based motivation coaching, but I feel like you just answered it. This is, you think, and I want you to prove it, that why this is the kind of foundational, pivotal way that we change anything in our lives. It starts through sensory in, motor out. Okay.
Exactly.
That's why you got into this space in the first place.
Well, I mean, it kind of found me, in a lot of ways through my background of being a physical therapist for over 30 years, but also, when I was 14 years old, I lost somebody really close to me, and I simultaneously developed really terrible back pain at 14 years old. And I had that back pain for 40 until I was 41 years old. So for 27 years, I experienced chronic back pain as a physical therapist, by the way, right? So my job is to help other people deal with their physical pain issues. And I was having trouble solving my own.
Wow.
Yeah. And what I realized is that the patterns that I didn't know it at the time until I was able to create a methodology and unpack it and unwrap it for myself. And, by the way, I've been back pain free, completely free for the last 9 years, having chronic pain for 27 straight years. And so I solved something about that. And it really came down to understanding how our sensory system is interwoven with our belief systems. aka our emotional connection with that, our thoughts with that, and ultimately the words that we use and the actions that we take,
right?
And being able to unravel that.
Gotcha. Oh man. Okay. That's incredible. So your pain turned into your power here. And this is why you came into this world. This is interesting to me because there are so many things that my friends and I, who are all like hard driving entrepreneurs, right? Stressed. Okay. Anxious. Some of my buddies just can't sleep. Some of my buddies are 60 pounds overweight. Some of my buddies feel like they're freaking bipolar half the time. And we're all hard charging entrepreneurs. We're all young kids. Life is a blender. It's crazy. And randomly people will be like, you know what? I don't know what's going on, but my hip is killing me. And I didn't do anything wrong. Like I didn't tweak it. Maybe it was the hike. Maybe I'm eating something. They're like, I'm just like, all of a sudden something is ailing them for the longest amount of time. Talk about the connection here. Cause you talked about a personal tragedy, a trauma in your life that somehow turned into back pain, directly or indirectly, for 25 years or more. And how does that happen in the body? What happens in your head? Cause I've had this issue before. I'm like, I have no idea why my neck is, I don't crane it. I'm not going back. And then my counselor's like, you're under a lot of stress. So talk about what's the connection here and why is it so important for people to be listening to their bodies?
Well, the first thing we have to understand, Scott, is that we are energy, right? We are actually human energy systems. We're not wearing meat suits here. We're not walking around, in some type of inert meat suit. We are living energy systems. And, quite frankly, if you get right down to it, we've known this for a really long time. The early 1900s, the first time that Dr. Einthoven created the EKG, and we showed that the heart has electrical currents associated with it. We had to recognize, we are electricity. We're electrical beings. And it's not just about individual organs like our heart or our brain. It's actually our whole connective tissue system is is a crystalline matrix, believe it or not, that has energetic properties associated with it. And every time we move, every time we breathe, every time we speak, we are creating a piezoelectric charge that goes through our entire connective tissue system. So we're energy phenomenons as human beings. Now, because we are, and we were having a little chat before about some of the technology out there using electromagnetic signals to change our physiology, right? Yep. So here's the thing: we're not just electrical; we're also magnetic. Faraday's law, right? So wherever you have an electrical impulse, you also have a magnetic field. So we're not only walking electric energy systems; we are walking magnetic fields. And so now we start thinking about how magnetic fields orient with one another. Now, magnetic fields are kind of like radio waves. I mean, they're not, we can kind of talk about these synonymously that way. Now, radio waves carry information. If you were to turn on your radio right now, you're basically just decoding information that was encoded somewhere else. So radio waves carry information. Magnetic waves carry information. So let's go back to the mind for a second. We are energy systems. We are filled with information. Now, that information is dominantly subconscious. We're not really consciously aware of it, but there's something going on subconsciously through our deep limbic brain, reptilian brain systems, from the thalamus, which is where brain waves are propagated from, sending these radio signals out through our whole body. So something happens in our in the border between external and internal. In my case, I lost someone close outside of me, and what was the interface with something that was happening internally? That information got melded together in my energy system and essentially created an energy blockage somewhere. Now, that energy blockage, again, this isn't like foo-foo, woo-woo kind of stuff. It all has to do with trauma reflexes. At a very deep level, all animals have an instinctual impulse to move towards something that gives life and away from something that takes away life, right? So in other words, moving towards pleasure and away from pain. Now, that movement is muscular. That's an actual physical reflex in the body that takes place. Now, those connective tissue systems they wrap our muscular system. So fascial tissue wraps myo tissue. So every time we have a muscular contraction, we are basically programming that connective tissue cellular matrix. Wow. So when we have something happen in our life that's traumatic and we are moving away from it, because that's typically what happens with the traumatic reflex, that's how we're programming that information into our connective tissue matrix. That, of course, wraps nerves, blood supply in your hip. So all of a sudden the hip is painful, and really what it is, it's a shrinking and a contracting of the connective tissue system in those areas that is now blocking the energy flow and correlating to different nerve impulses, sensory in, or blood flow information locally in the area, which also can be received as our brain is being painful. So I know that was a whole bunch of stuff right there, but I wanted to kind of give it to you really quick. Again, the body-mind interface.
Holy cow. Yeah, I mean, look, if I didn't start a 9-figure biotech company on radio waves and energy, I would be looking at you like flabbergasted right now. But you're 100% right. Like, we are electric and magnetic fields. We are energy. You get inside your cells, you got DNA. Inside of that, you got atoms. That's just energy. It's protons, neutrons, electrons. It's how we communicate with ourselves. It's how other things communicate with our bodies. It's, literally Happy, our biotech company, is using drug molecules to create information magnetic fields, informed magnetic fields with 22 million bits of information, mind you.
Yep.
And it plays back onto the body, and the body is almost tricked. And the body goes, oh, we have caffeine. Oh, we got nicotine. Oh, we have CBD or melatonin. It's time to go to sleep. It triggers those receptors. And it's how our bodies communicate. So the next logical step would be absolutely, right? Trauma blocks or stops or restricts blood flow or causes information to be stored in the body for later and to probably fester until it's really dealt with, right?
Yeah, and certainly, oftentimes, people call them triggers. Something happens in the external world that might trigger the trauma to surface. I think about it more like being activated, because the information is is being circulated through our subconscious systems, which means we're not consciously aware of it. It's not that it doesn't exist, it's actually already active in the system. We know that the brain is actually subconsciously scanning for that exact trauma to occur again so that we can stop it from harming us. So we become hyper vigilant of the exact thing that we don't want to experience again, which why it feels like it gets activated so quickly. But it's always there. It's not like it's dormant and then it gets triggered. It's always there. Now we just become consciously aware of it. That's the kind of the way that we think about it. And because we have that knowledge, since it's always active, you can tap into it and work with it while it's not so acute. Right? The worst time to work with something is when it's really acute, because you're dealing with all types of other sensory overload, defensive patterns, those types of things that shut down your capacity to become mindful of it.
Right, like talking to your 4-year-old in the middle of a screaming, crying temper tantrum about how their heart is doing and emotional intelligence. It's not the time.
Exactly.
Maybe in an hour when they calm down and they're sipping, cupping, and eating goldfish is the great time to say, how did you feel during that? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And it's the same thing for adults, by the way.
Yes.
Right. Because oftentimes we get hijacked by our 4-year-old self. That's
the reptilian. Is this like the reptilian brain kind of thinking? Like we look at reptiles or like antelope on the plain who like have this trigger that they're like, yeah, I'm about to get eaten. And it's this fight or flight type system. Is that kind of what you're getting at? Is what we're trying to get away from or activate away from, or explain that more?
Yeah, actually, that's more of what we call the mammalian brain, believe it or not.
Okay.
So the reptilian brain is the brain stem, and a baby is born with all of the reptilian brain already functioning. Reptilian brain is like peeing, pooping, sleeping, crying, feeding kind of stuff. Now, but the mammalian brain, which all mammals have, we're talking about the limbic system and the thalamus and the hippocampus. These parts of the brain are developed between the ages of 0 and 7 primarily in human children. And so those are the part of brains where we start to learn about social constructs and how we behave in certain social situations. What's acceptable? What's going to get me kicked out of the tribe? What's going to get me pulled into the tribe? Am I going to have safety? Am I going to get, or am I going to lose that security? So that stuff gets learned in the mammalian brain. But you're exactly right. Those emotional connections with social connectivity, social threats, really grow in the or are harnessed and utilized and worked through in that mammalian part of the subconscious brain. It's still part of the subconscious brain, by the way. It's not conscious. It's still subconscious, but it can hijack us through emotional systems where reptiles aren't really emotional, right? They're either on or off. They're eating primarily, but mammals have competencies around emotions, and especially as we go up in primates, a little bit more capabilities with that.
Got it. Okay. So then how does this relate to the trauma-informed motivation? Walk us through that piece, because I really want to get into these motivation maps, right? That's probably one of the most powerful things that you can give our audience is thinking through the motivation side of things. So talk to me a minute about this trauma-informed motivation, or even some of the holistic stress reduction practices, or like, what are the main things that your patients come to you for?
Well, as a physical therapist, over time, a lot of people come to me because of physical pain, right? I mean, that's the primaries. But now we work with people all over the place that have all kinds of things like performance. Like I want to be able to take my income higher, or want to be able to reach more people with my mission. We do train clinicians, therapists, and coaches in the sensation-based motivation coaching method because they want to have a bigger impact on their clients as well. So that's a big part of what we do. But there's almost always a physical pain component. And the cool thing is, like, this is what's the most, as you mentioned before, the most distressing and bewildering to people. Like, I work with high-level CEOs, and as I'm talking to them about their goals or what they want to achieve, I always ask, it's like, what's happening in your body? And they're like, well, I've had this back pain for the last 15 years, but, it's not a big deal. And I'm like, wait a second. Like that, we need to tap into that, because that's actually where the gold is for you. It's in that spot. And they're like, oh, kind of thing, don't understand it. But when it comes to trauma-informed motivation for a moment, people I have coming into me, I have to understand a couple of things. That, what the experts are telling us is that, and this is, by the way, like pre-pandemic numbers, that 9 out of 10 people have experienced a significant trauma in their life. So that's 90%. 90% of people have experienced a significant trauma. Now, that doesn't mean 90% of people have PTSD, right? There's a smaller percent of people who've experienced trauma go on to develop something like post-traumatic stress disorder. But even if you don't have PTSD, it doesn't mean that trauma hasn't impacted you in some adverse way. So we have to understand that 90% of people have been traumatized. Now, motivation, of course, is the reason for doing something. Like, what's the reason for doing that? What's your motivation for doing this, or what's your motivation for doing that? And, if you look into motivational literature, the motivational experts kind of up to this point in time really talk about things like, autonomy is really important for people's motivation, and expertise is really important for people's motivation. And that is absolutely true. But I find really interesting is that almost nobody up till now is talking about safety. But like if you don't feel safe, it doesn't. And by the way, it doesn't matter what it looks like around you. Like, I could look at, your environment, Scott, and go, hey, Scott's environment is perfectly safe. But if you don't feel safe internally, your motivation is always going to be to get safety, not to grow, not to change, not to have a different impact in your life. So when we talk about trauma-informed methodologies or trauma-informed frameworks, they've always got 5 parts to them, right? Safety is always the first part of a trauma-informed framework, and then trustworthiness, choice, collaboration, and empowerment. And that's what we call a trauma-informed, care process. So the way I think about it is, I think a lot of the ways that leaders and coaches and therapists try to motivate people is really missing the mark, because we're trying to rationalize with people a lot of times. We're trying to hold them accountable a lot of times. We're trying to push them through distress or discomfort to get what they want to get. And what they don't understand is if 9 out of 10 people have been traumatized, those things just don't work. It's so crucial that, again, a lot of, I don't know if this got picked up or not, but a lot of experts have been talking about how important it is for things like autonomy and expertise to motivate people. And those things are really valuable. But the thing that's being missed until really now is the idea of safety. Yes. And that safety is really the first thing. If people don't feel safe in themselves, I mean, it's important to have safety networks built outside of us, but really it's about being safe within each one of us. If we don't have our own safe places within inside, sensation-wise, I'm talking about sensory systems, because that's what drives everything. If we don't have our own safe sensory places within ourselves, we're always going to be seeking them, because that's the bottom of Maslow's pyramid. Yep. That's the bottom of the trauma-informed pyramid. We're always going to be seeking that before we can grow from that. Yeah. So we've got to set up that as a system first in order to build upon.
So it's like, I've had this issue. Like, I stressed out of my gourd. Like, we took our company public, barely eating very well, tons of stress and lack of sleep, and like override. My brain is hurting, and I'm doing CrossFit 5 times a week. And I'm sitting here wondering why it's not improving, right?
Yeah, right.
I'm working out 5 times a week. Like, it's because my CPU is broken. Like, I'm like on overload, trauma and stress. Like, how on earth are you supposed to, like, I'm working out the exact same weight, the exact same time of day as my buddy, Sam. Mm-hmm. And Sam's like gaining, and he's like going up in his weight. He's getting toned. He's getting cut. We're eating sort of similar stuff. Mm-hmm. And I'm just stressed out of my mind. And he lands one real estate deal every 9 months for 6 figures.
Yeah.
And not to crap on real estate people, but that's what he does. And I love him to death for it. But it's a very different type of work, different type of stress level.
Totally.
And do you think that is like, it comes down to that? Like, if you don't deal with that bottom layer, you can't move forward in the other parts of your life that you want to move forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Scott. And you asked about holistic stress reduction methods,
yes.
A couple of minutes ago. And here's the really interesting thing. Stress reduction isn't it isn't hard at all. It's really pretty straightforward. On a very basic level, any stress reduction stuff is just taking you away from the thing that's stressing you initially. Like, even like taking a walk for an hour or half an hour or even 10 minutes would be stress reducing. But here's the different thing with holistic stress reduction methods. Just the definition holistic implies that we are working on a multidimensional level: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, just from using the word holistic. And what we have to recognize is that, so someone like yourself who's stressed out because you're working so much, you're trying to get so much done, you're in super achiever mode kind of thing, right? So there's actually two deals there. The first deal is that you're stressed out. So holistic methodologies, like I love Qigong. That's probably my favorite. Qigong and Tai Chi are what we teach, are what we infuse in the things that we teach our students. And the reason I love them is because they're holistic, right? We're talking physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. They work on all levels. They're very effective at reducing your stress overall. That's great for a first level. Here's the deal though, you could just keep doing stress reduction and you could keep your stress down, but it's just like taking a medication. You've got to keep taking it in order to keep your stress down. It doesn't really change the root cause of anything. So like taking a walk would keep your stress down. It's not going to change the root cause. But here's the cool thing with Qigong and Tai Chi, things like this, is because they are energetic practices, while they start taking the stress down, what they also do is create brainwave change shifts so that now the reasons why you're doing what you're doing start to arise to the surface. The deeper drivers of why you're doing the things that you're doing that are causing the stress before can enter into your awareness. And then you can do something about those root causes.
Yeah. And so that's what gets into the motivation maps assessment. Yeah. So in the maps assessment, what does that look like? Is this a survey? Is this time one-on-one? Is it a multiple choice? Is it, you're touching their muscles and leg? Like, what is the MAPS assessment and what do you find through it?
See, the cool thing with motivational maps, it's actually an online assessment. So we send people an assessment. It takes about 12 minutes to fill out.
What's the website? But we're going to put all these in the show notes and the links, but tell it for those just listening, what's the website to go to?
Yeah, if you go to motivationbeyondmeasure.com. motivationbeyondmeasure.com. And you can go up and click on up in the header bar. It has, motivational mapping. And you can click on that if you have more interest in doing motivational maps. So it's an online assessment. It takes about 12 minutes to do, which is pretty quick. We can compare it to other potential psychological assessments. And the motivational mapping measures what we call the affective brain. So it has to do with the felt quality brain. There's three parts of the brain, right? Cognitive, affective, and cognitive. And motivational map measures the affective brain. And so for people who've done a lot of these assessments, what they tell us is when they take the map, they're like, God, that's really kind of simple. It's like, it takes 12 minutes. It's not really that complicated. I'm not sure how much I'm going to get out of this. And then what we offer people who take the maps is, people can just take the map and then read their report, or most people actually will schedule a debrief with us. And I'll sit down with them and go through their map with them and say, okay, this is what we're seeing from looking at the map to measure the full spectrum of motivation.
Got it.
And while the process on the front end is really simple, the depth of information that we get and then report back to someone, help them work through, is really, really deep. So I think it makes it a really accessible tool because there's not much of an investment from the person on the end taking the test, but they get so much back in terms of depth of knowledge about themselves, about the way they interact with the world, about the other people that they interact with in the world, and what motivates them, what gives them energy, what drains energy away from them. And then we're able to do, again, a debrief, and possibly, a lot of people go on to do coaching with us for a longer period of time to help them potentially make changes in the mapping construct or use the maps to help them get what they want to get out of their life. We really use that mapping process right along the way, and we can use it to track how they're doing en route to their goals.
Got it. That's so good. It's know thyself. I mean, this is, I've met with a guy, Dov Baron is his name, the Dragon's Den, and this was his big thing. He's like, I bet I could track every single one of your 5 businesses you've ever started to a traumatic childhood experience that left you gripping for a need. Mm-hmm. And I just started laughing. He literally told me my entire story based on the businesses I created.
Oh, funny.
I mean, I laugh. I'm in all these entrepreneur networks. I'm sure you are. It's like, we're all a bunch of messed up creatures, and we build businesses based on our trauma and based on things that have helped our lives. And we go, this might help a lot of other people, right? Like, Happy is a very good example. I built this because I wanted to be able to experience the effect of drugs without anything in my body. Mm-hmm. Okay. I have celiac. I have issues with alcohol. I can't drink beer. It messes me up terribly.
Mm-hmm.
I have a signal on this from alcohol, and it gives me the euphoric kind of buzz. We call it happy signal. It mimics a couple shots. It takes the edge off. It's great for like a social lubricant. I saved like 50,000 calories, and I didn't have to like have all the gut problems and all those issues. We've had, I don't know how many hundreds of people send in information about they were addicts, they were using this anyway. So trauma, now they use happy, and it helps them with recovery.
Amazing.
So people start things and they do things in life based on knowing themselves. And so, it's hard because people don't understand the value until they do it.
Yeah.
This is, if someone's dying, they're like, okay, I'll pay whatever it is to get, if I'm dying of thirst in the desert and you walk up with an Evian, I'm like, I'll give you $1 million for that.
Right.
But people don't understand that everyone kind of walks around with a base level of pain or stress or trauma or sleeplessness or anxiety. Like everyone has, like 9 out of 10 people have been through a significant trauma. They all carry that around. The issues are in the tissues. I'm sure you've heard that cliche.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
And I guess if it's anything I can tell people here, I've spent more money this year than in any other year of my life combined on working on myself, my brain, my trauma, my past, my issues. And I did a whole week of 40 years of Zen with Dave Asprey.
Yeah.
And 8,000 brain scans all in, and like crazy trauma work and forgiveness work. And it completely unlocked my life, completely unlocked my relationships. My dad and I got reunited and dealt with our issues from 20 years ago. Like, you have no idea what the price I would put on something like that. Right?
Yeah.
That's just the first of many. Like, we launched several businesses since 3 months ago because we know how they can help people, and I'm not having to deal with my trauma in the midst of it. And I'm able to delegate and bring on the right teams. And it's so hard to explain to people the importance and how crucial this is to do. And so if anyone out there's listening, they're just like, yeah, I do have a base level of this. It doesn't need to stay that way. It doesn't need to be something you just walk around with a ball and chain or a weight. You don't need to carry the bowling ball. You don't need to have the stress. You don't even have the pain. You can get that sort of help. And I think Brian's company is a great starting point. I think take this assessment. Some people will charge you $20,000 to figure it out. This is an assessment, and then you can meet one-on-one and get great coaching from a great team. So I love this, Brian. Thank you for sharing this with everybody. I think you're spot on. I think the way that you educate people is brilliant. So thanks for all this. I do have a couple more questions though I want to ask you.
Sure thing, Scott. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. So we've talked about root causes. We've talked about the motivation maps. We've given people motivationbeyondmeasure.com. Okay.
Yep.
Easy action step for everybody. Go there, take the simple assessment, figure out what your base trauma is, and your motivations and why you're doing the things you're doing. And that if you have pain, it's a great way to know. A lot of people do have that. In my life alone, I can think of several people. But what to you is the best advice? And it can be on this or anything that you've ever been given. And by who?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think probably one of the best pieces of advice that I've ever gotten was from a coach I worked with a long time ago. And, he said, Brian, when you're trying to change something, you've got to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And at the time, I bought into it. And this is why it was the best piece of advice I ever got, because I realized for most people, it's not accurate. And I've seen a lot of coaches over, and at the time, I have to admit, I did buy into that, and I tried doing some of those kinds of things with my clients. And what I realized, I started looking around me in the coaching industry and seeing how many coaches are like, you know what, you just got to throw up and then get back up and do it.
It's so true.
And I'm like, no, you don't. and started really thinking about, again, trauma, and that when we have those experiences, we actually deepen the trauma responses because we don't feel seen, we don't trust, we don't feel heard, we feel immobilized, and we don't feel we're respected by the people that are supposed to be in our corners, right? And so ultimately, that was the best piece of advice I ever got, because I understood that it actually isn't accurate for most people, that the best way to get to where we really, really want to go is to, number one, better understand ourselves and why our bodies do what we do when we're trying to change.
Yeah.
If we understand that our body has wisdom within it, and then we can begin to consciously shift the energy in our body. That's essentially what we teach people to do, is consciously shift the energy in their body to create a different sensory reality, which gives them a different life reality. Then uncomfortableness doesn't have to be a part of their life. They become safe in their skin because they know they can manage anything that comes up in their entire life.
Yeah. So instead of be comfortable with being get comfortable with being uncomfortable, it should be get comfortable with being yourself.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
Be comfortable with yourself. Like,
yeah.
I think that is where things get activated. That's where power gets unlocked. You're exactly right. Exactly right. Okay, that's brilliant. Okay, so anything else I forgot to ask, or you wish I would have asked? Anything you want the listeners to know before we sign off?
Well, I mean, I am so appreciative of this conversation, Scott, and I'm really, really excited about the technology that you're creating, because I think like us in kind of a kindred spirit kind of way, I've never really been into let me put some type of drug in my body to alter the way that I feel. And I think that's really what has driven me to study for so long on Zen practices and Qigong and Tai Chi, and what can I do in my own breath work, in my own sensory work? What can I do to drive my own experience using my consciousness to help leverage my subconscious? And I see that you're doing that with technology as well, to not become dependent or interface with chemicals outside of us. And again, pharmaceuticals, no kind of thing. There's a place for all that. There's definitely a place for all that. But I so respect the work that you're doing, and I feel like being a kindred spirit with you in that regard is I'm really grateful to be here with you.
Absolutely, man. Well, this was a blast. Thanks for saying that. I think we are kindred spirits. We're both on the same path for sure. We both understand that the body is energy, and it's about activating the right energy and helping people move forward in life without the pain that so many people think is just part of life. So brilliantly said. So where can people find you? So I know we have motivationbeyondmeasure.com. Go there, take the survey. Where else can people go?
Yeah, so you can find me on
social media. Yeah,
you can find me on LinkedIn. That's where I hang out probably most. We're on Facebook also, Motivation Beyond Measure on both LinkedIn and Facebook. Or, feel free and just reach out to me directly on LinkedIn and just send an invite to connect. And I'm happy to do that as well.
Awesome. And we'll put all this in the show notes for you listeners as well. It's Brian Trzaskos with a Z, Trzaskos. And it's the sensation-based motivation coaching. You can go again to motivationbeyondmeasure.com to take the assessment. Brian, thank you again. This was a fantastic conversation. And thanks so much, everybody, for listening in. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Scott.